Hi, I'm your host Dave Kemp, and this is Future Ear Radio. Each episode, we're breaking down one new thing, one cool new finding that's happening in the world of hearables, the world of voice technology. How are these worlds starting to intersect? How are these worlds starting to collide? What cool things are going to come from this intersection of technology? Without further ado, let's get on with the show. Okay, so we're joined here today by Liz Fuemmeler. Liz, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Liz. I'm an audiologist at Hearing and Balance Specialist of Kansas City. It's actually my first year out, so I took a position as a Vestibular Specialist at the practice, and it's a private practice. There's 3 other audiologists that work there, and it's in Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm originally from Missouri, so I'm excited to be back in the Show Me State.
Very cool, fellow Missourian as well. So the reason I wanted to bring Liz on today is, this podcast, it has a really wide range of different guests. And one of the type of guests that I've really wanted to have is like a real young, fresh out of college, fresh out of grad school audiologist, somebody that's just entered into the world, and get their perspective, because I've talked a lot, in these real audiology specific episodes about sort of like the changing landscape. So I definitely wanted to bring Liz on. This isn't the first time I've talked with Liz. I actually had her on back when I was doing Oak Tree TV, my video series. I had her on, and back then she was the head of the Student Academy of Audiology. So definitely, helping to really push the ball forward. So let's just start right there. Like, can you share with us some of the most exciting things that you guys did when you were with the SAA, and sort of like what's the state of the Student Academy of Audiology today, and what are some of the things that they're working on?
Yeah, so I'm still a semi-member of the SAA. I'm kind of serving as a half advisor as past president, so it's nice to stay plugged in to the students because I half identify as one still. But yeah, I've been really excited to see what the Student Academy has been doing. Of course, we have more students than ever who are involved, over 70 different chapters at universities, which is just neat because some of them are undergraduate only chapters. So those are, freshmen to seniors that are already committing to audiology that young. It's really, really neat to see. One thing I was excited about this year, we just rolled out the audiology student census. So last year we spent the whole year working on it, but we've never really taken a good evaluation about what students are like, what they're interested in, where they're coming from. We just didn't have a very good grasp on what the typical demographic of someone entering audiology school was. So we have that survey out, and I'm excited to see the data because it'll be interesting to kind of know if we have people who are interested in PhD or nobody interested, or if we have people who are interested in a certain sector of audiology, and that's what got them interested. So I'm really pumped to see those results.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, you said that you've transitioned, right? And I think that for some of the listeners that might be young aspiring audiologists themselves, or also fellow, recent grads that are now working in the real world, how did you find and land upon the job that you're in?
Yeah, great question. So my current position actually came as a result of my involvement as a student with the SAA, which is crazy that ties back to what we were just chatting about. But I served as a member on the American Academy of Audiology board, the AAA board. I was the student liaison, and so I met people through there, and one of the members owns this practice here in Kansas City and had reached out to me and asked if I was interested in applying for a position that they had. And it just really worked out, fit super, super well with what I was looking for. But it's interesting to be a student who's, been in school, been exposed to every part of audiology, and then you reach the end and it's your turn to decide, what you're looking for. And I was kind of surprised where I ended up because I never thought I'd end up in a private practice. I never thought I'd specialize in such a seemingly small part of audiology, vestibular science. And so it really taught me to be very open to new settings and new roles. And I've really enjoyed it for sure.
That's interesting. So why vestibular and why private practice? I mean, it sounds like part of it was the opportunity that presented itself, but what aspects of those two things, you can go kind of, in tandem or just one after another, but what is it in maybe also through the experience that you've had so far, what sort of, what was the gravitating force around those two things?
For sure. Well, I always joke with people about how I ended up in vestibular is like the game of Plinko, if you've ever seen it. I kept just getting pushed down
Yep.
one area. It's kind of a joke, but I got into vestibular. I thought I'd never go into it, but I did a T35 research assistantship at Boys Town in Omaha, and I was in a vestibular lab and learned so much and loved it. And then did my externship at Mayo Clinic, which has a really good vestibular program. And so I think I was drawn to that. I love puzzles, and vestibular audiology is very puzzle based, as is the rest. But you really get involved with the medical field, medications. You work with neurologists and all different types of healthcare professionals. And I like the fact that, when people are dizzy, it takes them out of their life. They're not driving, they're not working, they're not even walking at some points.
Mm-hmm.
If they're dizzy or imbalanced enough, and so for me, the amount of impact I could have in a patient's life seems pretty large when I can help figure out an issue that's going on and set them on their way. So yeah, vestibular, it's surprising that I'm in it, but my vestibular teacher at Purdue, she used to call me Dizzy Lizzie. Apparently Beatles have covered that song, but I guess that can be my Twitter handle in the future.
There you go. So what about the private practice side? Maybe even if it wasn't what drew you to private practice, what are the things that you find to be either rewarding or attractive to that type of setting?
Yeah, it's a great question. So like I said, I thought private practice would be the last setting I would end up in. And, my main fear and kind of non-negotiable is I didn't want to be dictated by, the business of the practice on how I should serve the patient. So I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
feel like I have to do certain tests just to meet the bottom line for the practice.
Totally.
And it was probably an unfair assumption that I had of a private practice, operating as a business. So for me, looking for jobs, I knew what were my non-negotiables, and I am really trying to stay attuned to evidence-based care and practice. And so I knew for a fact that I didn't want to feel forced into doing things I didn't feel was ethically right for the patient's care. So luckily, this private practice is super unique, and I feel like is really great about treating each patient as an individual, and I don't feel any pressure there, which is awesome. The other aspect that's interesting, and I think tends towards kind of the future of audiology, is as a private practitioner, and especially in vestibular, which is a little bit more uncommon, you have the autonomy to make decisions as a standing healthcare provider, and it's very unique from the other settings I'd rotated through, where maybe audiology is under an ear, nose, throat department or some other
Mm-hmm.
department. It's kind of neat to be on your own, and it's scary, especially as a new professional, but you do have the professional autonomy to talk on your expertise in what you've studied in. And I really like that aspect. And I think that will trend well towards where audiology is going.
For sure. And before I get ahead of myself, because I
Yeah.
definitely want to touch on that whole topic of the future of the industry and your perspective on that. So you've transitioned, right? You've made this jump in and now you're working full time. Like, what has been the thing that you were that's caught you by most surprise? Like, what was the thing that you felt like maybe you didn't have a formalized background, a formalized education around it in terms of the background, and like, what aspect of your day-to-day is the thing that you maybe felt not necessarily most unprepared for, but like caught you by surprise?
For sure. I think one of the top things that was the biggest learning curve for me was billing, just
Mm-hmm.
because at my previous sites that I had rotated through, that wasn't something as a student that I did. So that was probably the most challenging thing, just for me to get used to different insurance companies and get used to
Totally.
talking to talk of, you can't bill this for certain insurance companies, but you can bill it here, and knowing the codes. So I feel like a lot of that comes with practice.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely discussed it in school, but it's a little bit more abstract when you're not using it daily. So that was a big learning curve. The other thing that surprised me is there's just such a fine balance between confidence and humility as a new provider, because the amount of times that I've had a patient be like, so how long have you been practicing, or how old are you, or and it's hard to respond in a confident and professional manner to say, don't worry, I'm qualified enough to look in your ears. And so that's one line, is really boosting yourself up and
Mm.
saying, I have the skills and confidence to be able to treat you and help you, and at least help with a diagnosis here. but then enough humility to not overdiagnose or make assumptions, and be always, willing to learn and seek out help when you need it. It's a really fine balance, I think, because you want to be confident, but you're also feel like you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. I think a synonymous term for that might be imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I think this is something that like a lot of young people, like particularly when you're starting out, like I know when I first started to create videos and create podcasts and stuff like that, like there's a total, you just almost have to get so comfortable in your own skin that you can just say like, I'm qualified, this is something that I'm passionate about. For you, it's like I have like a ton of expertise and education that stems from all this. And so like, I think like just, it's a matter of just, it takes time, but it's just a process basically. But you did mention with the codes, I thought that's really interesting because I've talked to Dr. Ian Windmill before. He's, a former AAA president, and he's made mention of this whole idea that you can a lot of hearing care professionals can be more effective with the way that they bill, just by having a better understanding of what exactly they can bill for. And it sounds like you're sort of ahead of the curve, because I'm sure every single day you're finding like, oh, I had no idea that for this particular insurance company, I can bill this, or for Medicare, I can bill this. I mean, is that kind of how you felt? Is that it's like every single day you learn something new?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's what's interesting is as soon as you get the hang of it, things can change with insurance companies, or like, obviously it's January 2020 and I'm like, okay, what's changed? Because every patient, I feel like I do have to double check or ask. And, that's why it's nice to be a part of a practice that's done this before. I couldn't even
Totally.
imagine starting out on my own and having to figure it all out. But, it's nice to have the safety net to help.
Yeah, and I just think that's such valuable skill, right? Like that's that translates to really any kind of hearing care job that you would ever have, like whether you're working in a private practice or you're working in a hospital, wherever it might be. I would imagine that that's going to be a skill that can translate across those. So with the future, I think this is a really interesting topic that I'm always curious to hear how young professionals are perceiving all of this change that's happening. I guess rather than like drill into any one specific thing, why don't we just talk at a high level? What are the things that, maybe let's start with, what are the things that excite you about the future of the industry and the profession?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, especially this year, one thing that's been most exciting just internally within the field of audiology is the collaboration between the three major organizations
Mm-hmm.
towards, healthcare and legislator. I can't even talk right now. But, all the stuff that's been going on in DC, that's been a many, many years of hard work and collaborating together. And so me seeing that, especially after being involved with the AAA board and higher level with the SAA, I know what a huge feat that is for all three organizations to be working together on something that could be really influential to our patients. So that for sure excited me quite a bit, and I'm excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So what about maybe some of the risks that you see on the horizon, or things that maybe are a little bit more fear based?
Yeah, I think, the one that I've heard for a couple years, and I can relate to it in a way, is related to over-the-counter hearing aids. I think that's going to continue to be, and it's mainly just an unknown until we get some more
Mm-hmm.
details from the FDA, et cetera. But it's a big unknown on how that's going to affect our field. One thing that, helped with my decision to go into vestibular science is kind of related to that, because
Mm-hmm.
the way I see audiologists in general, and I hope the public will also see this, is that audiologists, are truly the experts of hearing loss and imbalance and vestibular issues. And so we were really the diagnosticians, and also
Mm-hmm.
helping towards a solution towards a lot of the issues. And so for me, going into vestibular, I'm hoping to be maybe a little less impacted by whatever boosts or disadvantages come from an over-the-counter situation. But who knows? It definitely played into my decision a little bit, because I hope it'll make me potentially less impacted by any
Mm-hmm.
negativity coming from it, but we'll see.
No, I mean, I would totally agree with you. I think that the the services are what's going to be hardest to disrupt. I think that anything that's very product oriented, any business model that's super specific to the sale of the hearing aid, although all practices and really all hearing care professionals business models that I know of are
Right.
some way in shape tied to the sale of the hearing aid. But I think that I've had this conversation with a number of people that I've had on the podcast, that I think that the strongest area of differentiation is going to be expertise, your education, and just your sheer knowledge of everything. And so if you have a really core differentiated area even within that, like vestibular, I think that makes a ton of sense, that like that's a really strong point of differentiation. So like what's, you know, where do you see not only the industry but like yourself, and like kind of like where do you see things being 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Do you think that you yourself will want to own a private practice? You know, is that something that your peers are thinking about, or is that something that's not really a high priority anymore? And I'm just curious why that would maybe be.
Yeah, for sure. It's a little bit hard, I think, for a while, we've all been planning ahead for like, where am I going to do
Right.
my externship? Where am I going to have my first job? So finally, right now, I'm feeling very at peace with not having to plan,
Totally.
too much further in advance. But something I've started at our practice is concussion programs. So there's a lot of interesting research coming out in
Interesting.
vestibular audiology about some tests that are sensitive to concussion. So that's surprisingly taken a pretty good excitement in the area. And so I'm hoping personally that that will continue to grow. And I've
Very
really
cool.
enjoyed working with some health professionals in the area on that. And I could see that being a really cool area for vestibular audiology to grow in as well. So that's one thing I personally will work on. I would be interested probably in ownership in the future, but like I said, right now I'm really enjoying work-life balance.
Right.
After working in grad school, it felt like 25 hours a day, and on SAA stuff, et cetera. I'm really enjoying being able to work and do as best I can while I'm there, and then come home and also relax a bit.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. So, as we close here,
Yeah.
last question. What would you say to any aspiring audiologist, you know, any of the students today? What's the biggest takeaway that you've had from sort of like, you know, when you started this journey where you decided, I'm going to be an audiologist? Now you are an audiologist. You're in, you know, this great new setting. What's the biggest takeaway that you've had that you can share with an aspiring young student, audiologist, whoever it might be?
Yeah. I think two main things. One, you're in charge of your education. I think a lot of times students expect their institutions or their externship sites or wherever they are to provide enough education for them to feel confident. And that's one thing I learned once I started going off site for clinics is really you're the person who is going to push forward your own knowledge and learning the most. So
Mhm.
you kind of have to take hold of that early in grad school and know that not every university has the resources to provide what you need for the whole scope of audiology, and not every externship site or practice site that you'll pass through. And I think taking hold of that can make you a really great clinician if you continue to learn. The other thing I think, which is obvious if you look at my resume, is just staying involved and getting
Yeah.
involved outside of grad school. I think it's kind of the trend, at least what I thought was, oh, I'm going to get to grad school, just go to school, and then like I'm going to start working. And it's really not the case. I think the more you get involved, the better. I mean, I'm a classic case of I got my job because I was
Mhm.
involved outside of grad school in, national organizations, state organizations. And really, there's so much talent among students that it's almost a disservice to our whole field when people aren't getting involved outside of grad school, because we have some really bright and confident and great ideas coming from the student population that anytime I hear that, I try to encourage a student to do something outside of their own school or classroom, because the students can make a really big difference. And I think a lot of times they don't have the confidence to feel like they can. But
Yeah.
putting in a little extra time and doing some things outside of your school makes it, I think, a huge difference.
I would totally agree with that. I think you're right. You're the classic example of that. You put yourself out there, you really kind of like challenged yourself to kind of keep doing more and more things, and it landed you this awesome job. And I think that's a really good testament to the power that is, just putting yourself out there and getting out of your comfort zone a little bit. So Liz, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for everybody for joining us again this week. And we'll chat with you next time. Cheers. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Future Ear Radio. For more content like this, just head over to futureear.co, where you can read all the articles that I've been writing these past few years on the worlds of voice technology and hearables and how the two are beginning to intersect. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll chat with you next time.